we've got a Jill Carver.
Yes.
A painting and a person.
Right.
And the painting is on her new show. So, Jill, thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's great to be in town.
I know. You're going to get 5 days or something?
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a week and I've got some friends coming in, so a bit of a reunion.
And a big major show.
A celebration of the show making it to the walls.
Yeah.
Safely driven down.
Yeah,
so.
It was very funny. I saw your Facebook or Instagram, I don't know which one it was, post, and it was like you were loading up in the snow,
10 inches 20
of snow.
degrees.
God.
And I lost the use of one windshield wiper on the way down. But fortunately, it was on the passenger side. So, yeah. And it was pretty much slow and sleet all the way through to the Four Corners.
Oh, my God.
Even Cayenta through to Flagstaff. Snow on the ground everywhere.
God.
Yeah.
One time I lost my windshield wipers going back to medical school, and it's an old beater car that I had, and I had to stop, and I hooked up something so I could do it like this, and it was like cold and rainy, and so I went like that, making it go.
That's a great idea.
So I drove with my knees, and I did this movement with my hands. Yeah, it worked.
Because the old small cars, you could probably reach out the window and somewhat wipe it, but I'm in a Toyota Tundra. So
did you get it fixed, by the way?
No, not yet.
Okay, you should do that. There's a place across the way.
Okay.
So it's very good.
I'm wondering if it's a fuse or a motor.
Yeah, you better get it fixed. But they may not have a piece. You may, when you go back to Colorado, have that same problem.
Right.
So today we're going to talk about something different. Usually on podcasts, and you and I have already done a big podcast. I think it was podcast 158 for those who are listening to my different things that we did over Zoom. That was at the beginning of the pandemic, more or less, I think. Yeah. And then, so you're here for a big major show for us as a one-person show, but I wanted to go through the process of doing a show, and in this case, all the shit, and I don't curse often, but I will say that for those, that you had to go through to get to this process. So I think it's interesting, and I think it's important for artists and people out there to understand how hard it is to pull off these shows and what's involved. It's not just, somebody goes, hey, would you like to...
We're all having great fun behind the scenes just painting every day.
Right?
No, life happens too. So
yeah, I mean, it does. And just for a little bit of background for those who might not know about you, maybe you could just give us a quick, short history from you, because you were in London and then you came here in 2002, I believe.
2002.
Like how I knew that date?
20 years, which is incredible at this point. So... yeah, this is kind of my second career. My first career was working at the National Portrait Gallery in London as a curatorial research assistant there. I did that for 12 years. Met my husband there. We long-distance dated for 4 or 5 years. And then I decided to make the jump to Texas, of all places, from London.
Right.
Quite the culture shock.
Yeah.
Talk about defining moments. That was definitely another one.
I'm sure.
And became full-time artist in Texas, 2002.
And did you know when you went to Texas, that's it? This is something this hits me, America and the West?
I definitely loved the West, and I loved the desert. And when I painted in England, I kind of used to go to pretty bleak, open, wild places. Dungeness, down on the coast, Scotland, the Orkney Islands.
Right.
I mean, pretty barren, open places. So I think the expanse of the West resonated with me, and large areas of wilderness certainly did.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The color palette, totally different.
Yeah.
So
gray and green.
Well, in England, I was pretty much using the colors that I saw out there. So yellow ochres, sap greens, Payne's grays, and I moved to Texas, and that didn't work there. So
it had to be jarring almost, right?
Very jarring, and a huge realization that I had to go back to basics and just learn the fundamentals of being able to paint anything just using red, blue, and yellow and white. And it was a very steep learning curve, but it really did me the world of good in terms of progressing as an artist.
And how long did that take, do you think?
Oh, man. I remember probably 2 years before I felt comfortable with the red, blue, and yellow palette.
Wow,
and
that's
then I started expanding from there. There's a lot of artists that don't do that, and they probably should.
Yeah.
You know, they get hung up with having way too many colors on their palette and don't understand how they cross-mix,
Yes.
you know, or how color theory works, you know, mixing across the color wheel through complements to neutralize. So if I always say to my students, if you've never done it, try it, because you'll learn so much
Right.
about how color works.
And that's one of the things you do is you teach. And do you have anything coming up, by the way, just in case?
I did 2 at Scottsdale Artist School in November, and I'm going to do the same this year. So 2 in November at Scottsdale.
So 2022. This coming up. Okay, I had to think about that. It's like, where are we? Who am I? So you, at some point, make the move to the Southwest, the Four Corners area.
Yes.
And when was that? When did you move?
So the Texas,
Rico.
I'm English, so the Texas heat was never a natural fit for me.
Oof,
I kind of struggled with it.
Yeah.
And so in 2008, we bought an old miner's cabin in Rico, which was just one front room and one back room.
Right.
Behind the bar up there. I know you know Rico. So,
yeah, I do.
And I really enjoyed the community there. And my husband's from Colorado originally, so I just began to spending. It was meant to be a base for me to paint, get the dogs out of Texas,
Right.
more central, because driving to events or shows from Texas, it would just take. It takes 2 days to get out of the state,
Right.
you know? So I'd spent a lot of time driving, so Colorado felt more central. And so we bought this miner's cabin. I was just spending increasingly amounts of time there.
Yeah.
And then my husband retired, and we just couldn't afford 2 homes at that point.
Yeah.
It was just a case of choosing one, you know? So we chose Rico and upgraded from an old miner's cabin to a house with more rooms.
And what and you bought it in 2008? Is that when you bought it?
So we bought the cabin in 2008 and bought the house in 2014.
I see.
Yeah. At the bottom of market, actually.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. Yeah,
it
I'm
was
sure in that area.
It was a foreclosure. The
Wow.
house was a foreclosure deal, so we
Yeah.
got a real steal on it.
Well, and you've changed and done everything and added a studio and all that.
Yeah,
good
and then
stuff.
it took me a couple of years. The lots next door were empty but privately owned, and it took me a few years to negotiate that with the owner. And he finally, he got to know us, and he really liked the idea of me having my studio next door rather than renting a space in town.
And had you been to the Four Corners area before you bought your place in Rico?
Yeah, so my husband's from Colorado, and we always drifted up from Texas in the summer anyway, just to grab 2-3 weeks vacation. And we'd always end up in the kind of Silverton, Red Mountain Pass, Ouray area. So we definitely loved Southwest Colorado. Larry, my husband's from Colorado Springs, and of course the whole Front Range is just so different now.
No, I like
so
where
we
you are.
loved Southwest Colorado, and I loved as an artist, if you draw let's say a 3-hour driving radius
Right.
from Rico, I can be in Moab, I can be in Canyonlands, I can be up near Grand Junction. The range of material there. Four Corners is an hour and 15 minutes right to that monument.
So you can be to Shiprock, you can be to everywhere. Have you
Yeah,
painted
and
that, by the way, Shiprock?
Shiprock I haven't, no.
Ooh, there you go. No, I think it would be fantastic. You just got to get the right day.
Yeah, right.
Because the clouds that come in there sometimes are insane.
Yeah.
And the views of, not just so many people just paint the Shiprock, right? But,
Right.
But it's that effluvial volcanic, uprising that goes into it that really I find the most interesting.
Yeah.
And it's perfect for lines.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, I'm working my way out. I spent a lot of time Mesa Verde.
Right, right.
I mean, I just think where, desert mesas and mountains come together, it's an extraordinary region there.
Yes, I agree.
For not only the variety of landscape, but the type of landscape. There's not many places that I know of where mesas, desert, and mountains come together in such a tight dense area.
Yeah, I think it's really unique. And the colors are unique.
Yeah.
I mean, for those who are watching the podcast and not just listening, but watching, you can see the painting behind Jill, and that shows you the colors that are potential. I mean, that's in over by San Juan, right?
Yeah, Sand Islands. Yeah, so just outside of Bluff.
Yeah, there you
in
go.
southeest Utah.
Yeah, it looks like it too. It's beautiful. Oh,
yeah.
Love that painting. Sorry. Art will always take me away from a conversation. I have to look at you and not the art. So how long did it take you to figure out the Southwest? Because that's very different than Texas.
It is. Yeah, well, I guess I first started going to the Big Bend in West Texas, and that was my kind of desert experience. But, as Matt Smith said, it's like the Big Bend in Texas is like the Sonoran Desert without anything growing in it, I think was his response to the Big Bend. But in terms of big expanses and just... It's mind-bending to an English person driving that many miles out to the desert. So I think, I fell in love with the desert and got to know some of the plants that somehow managed to exist on 4 inches of rain a year.
Right.
And then from there, my first painting trip in Utah was with Catherine Statz, actually. Catherine Statz and Kate Starling. So around Zion National Park, Kolob Canyon up in there. Red Rock just baffled me to begin with. It breaks all the rules of painting. We're taught that anything in sunlight is warm and anything in shadow is cool, and Red Rock so often breaks the rules, and you'll get the warmest hues in that reflected light in the shadow planes. And then on the the top of the Red Rock where you've got the sun and the blue sky as sources of light. It's the blue sky that dominates, and it will actually be a cool where the light hits. So it took me probably a year to realize that, and then another year to figure out how to switch things up, you know? So fascinating. And we all love a challenge, right? Anything that breaks the rules and you think that's not behaving according to the rules, why is that?
And did you know it didn't work because you could just see the finished product? You go,
yeah, it doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel right. Yeah.
And it doesn't feel right in the sense that it doesn't have the essence of what you were looking at?
Not only does it have not have the essence, but there is something, you try and fit the rules that you've learned from books, and lectures to what's there, and you try and twist everything, and you're like, that light doesn't feel right. It's not matching what I'm seeing out there, Yeah, and as soon as I flipped it up, I was like, oh, yeah.
Well, you become immersed into the land and the colors in the sky and all those things. Yeah. Pretty soon it becomes part of you, right?
Right.
And I think that's one of the things I tell artists that, they want to paint, Tucson, let's say, but they live on the East Coast. You've got to spend some time here.
Right.
To be able to understand the light and the colors and the, the vegetation and all that.
And that's an interesting point because, in thinking about this, these are my first major saguaro paintings that are in the show.
Right.
And, I'm obviously not living in this region. But for me, I know some people will react and say, oh, well, she's painting for the Tucson market, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I'm kind of come from a place where painting is my language. It's how I relate to the world. So if I'm going to spend 10 days here and try and understand a place, the form that I try and understand a place is I try and read relevant material, but I try and paint it. And by painting it, I'm trying to understand how it works and how it's all put together.
Yeah. Well, you got it.
So painting is my language, and I think John Ruskin in England used to advocate that, as prickly and dour a character as he was. He kind of encouraged everyone to try and draw in order to understand how something is put together.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I thought you did the saguaros for me because I love them so much. No?
Well, I've heard you say in the past that you always test your artists on how well they can paint them. So
it's true.
whether they have the chops or not.
It's true. Well, you did. Yeah, I was looking at the one.
But I couldn't not paint them.
Yeah.
If you spend 10 days hiking in Sabino Canyon, you're going to want to paint those things. They're beautiful.
Well, you got it right in two ways that are critical. The first one is they look like saguaros and not stick figures,
Right.
And I don't mean that in a flippant way, but a saguaro has all this kind of just age to it. It's like a human face. It's like painting an old person without wrinkles, right? I mean, you could do it, but it's going to look funny. And they have, bumps and broken arms, and, they don't go straight, they go sideways. And then the other thing that I thought you captured so adroitly was the halo.
Yeah.
Now that is looking at saguaros.
Yeah.
That truly is when
Yeah.
you have that backlight in the golden hour and there's just this halo of light that outlines it. And maybe you can talk about that one painting that you did, because I thought it was so interesting how you incorporated that not only in the painting itself, but from your mindset and your own mind's eye of what it was after you know.
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating. I mean, sunset in the parks. I mean, I know Tucson is renowned for its incredible sunsets, and you post these jaw-dropping photographs all the time that
they're real.
prove that that's real. But being in those kind of, in the desert with these massive sculptural forms, it's like your eyes just can't quite understand it. And I've even noticed with some of your photos, if you zoom in, like where the mountains meet the sky, even the camera is actually imposing somewhat of a halo line around that, like there's a shimmer going on. And you see it in Western, Dixon saw it, particularly in his mountain things, where those two contrasting tonal range forms come together. And it's not quite static, and if you look at it too long, it's almost makes you a little dizzy, but the spines on the saguaro are slightly kind of they're warm colored. They're kind of beige through to oranges through to pinks anyway, and then you get this light come through them, so they are acting as a filter as such to all that vivid color coming behind it. And on that one occasion, the sunset with the hues of pinks and oranges that's in the show, I was just having such fun with it, because you can't capture what is reality.
Right.
It's like when you're there, you can't quite put your finger on what's happening.
Yeah, no, it's weird.
And I knew that that halo, as it went up the side of the form, was clearly filtering whatever was behind it. So you have to be careful, because if it's against a gray cloud, it was quite different to when it was against a streak of pink or red.
Right.
And I mean, you can't paint that. It's moving so fast. Yeah. So in that instance, I'm taking notes in my sketchbook, just writing things down. And again, there's a rule breaker, because you're used to your darkest darks being in the foreground, and they are, but where that foreground meets that horizon and the bright source of light, there is this dark, vibrating, warm violet that's going on in there with these bright reds behind it. I mean, the whole thing was such fun. But it moves fast, and in the area on the left of that canvas where I kind of really pushed this idea, because I actually did start when I was drawing in and constructing the design of those saguaros, and I used Loomis's informal subdivision to place the tops of all those arms so that there are hidden armatures in there. I was actually drawing them by the halo. I have photographic shots of the early stages of that painting, and I was just drawing them by the halo, and I really liked there was something about the feel of that felt right, and that's unusual for me to kind of stick with that. I'd perhaps previous to this year, I might have started self-questioning that, but I just kind of rolled with it. So that little grouping on the left, I just thought, my gosh, I really like just the halo alone. And actually, when I was in bed at nighttime, when I was in the design phase of that painting, you know, and I close my eyes, it's like when you stare at a window and then you've got this vivid kind of imprint of it. I was seeing saguaros at nighttime. I mean, I just had such fun with it. And I just thought, you know, I want an element of that. You know, maybe time's passing so quickly, I didn't get to finish them.
Right.
You know, maybe, I think even when you're out there, you know, in real place, real time, you get that sense that you can't take it all in at once.
No, it's very difficult, and it's so fleeting.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you do like a quick plein air type thing, or is it easier just to take notes and photographs?
For me, it was notes and photograph, and then I was doing the plein air studies during the day.
I see.
You know, so I got to know, you know, what was in the foreground, and, you know, I didn't just want that piece to be about a silhouette.
Yeah.
You know, so in both the saguaro paintings, the desert floor and the foreground and all the ground cover plants were really important aspects of that too. You know.
And do you consider yourself a plein air painter at this point?
I don't like being labeled as one, because I certainly made my name doing all the competitions. That's how I got known in this country.
And in a lot of the higher ups as far as the different organizations too, right?
Right. But I haven't done a plein air competition in 10 years now, so I've definitely become more of a studio painter. That's my strength now, is doing the larger studio pieces. I think any decent landscape painter is a plein air painter in some form.
Yes.
You know, and even in Plein Air Painters of America, you know, we have, you know, Matt Smith that can do highly resolved, highly finished masterpieces on site, to maybe myself and the likes of Skip Whitcomb that are just kind of stumbling around writing notes and trying to get an idea more than a finished painting. Yes. You know, we're going for color notes, we're going for ideas. So we have the whole range in that group, and we're all plein air painters. We're just all landscape painters.
Yeah.
And I think for any landscape painter, they are working plein air in some form.
Yeah.
You know.
And even those who do figurative stuff like John and Terry Moyers.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Their free time is plein air painting.
Right.
So, and it shows in the studio work that they've gotten the imagery, the colors, the composition. Whatever.
I think the whole phrase plein air painter is built on the assumption, and the competitions in a way have kind of redefined that title as, you know, you're producing a finished frameable product in the field, you know, and I don't think it is that for a lot of landscape painters. It's about learning, it's about studying.
And use it for reference.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I have boxes and boxes of pretty raw studies in my studio, you know, and they're like gold. I mean, the Canyonlands pieces in the show, you know, I'll just pull out every weather piece or every red rock piece that I've done, because there's something in there that is gonna get a memory going. Yeah.
Do you think you can be a great landscape painter and not do plein air studies?
No.
Yeah.
No.
I would think you.
I mean, you can copy a photograph.
Yeah.
You know, and be a good draftsman.
Yeah.
You know, so you can still produce attractive pictures. But I think for me, landscape painting is where you really see the essence of the artist come across, as well as the essence of that landscape.
Yeah.
It's the combination of the two and how they combine.
Yeah. I think Dixon's a good example.
Absolutely.
You know, you look at how his plein air paintings versus when he does a studio work, you can see what's there and you can tell. I mean, I'm sure any artist that comes into my museum could look at the paintings and know exactly which one is plein air and which one's not, or one that was started as a plein air and maybe finished in the studio.
Totally. I mean, for some of the little sky and land studies I have in the show, the little 12-16s, yes. I mean, I definitely had Dixon as an inspiration. You know, some of his larger studio stuff, highly designed, highly constructed. Right. Some of those little plein air ones that, I mean, you know they're plein air because there is nothing. There is land, There is sky, and maybe the thing that holds it all together is one cloud or one sagebrush, you know, and that is the reality of the Four Corners landscape.
Yeah.
Quite often, it's not the drama of mesas and structural shaped clouds. It's just the expanse of not a lot going on.
Yeah,
but
I think
it's
that
beautiful.
I think that shows in your. I hadn't really thought of it, but I think that really shows in your show that it is about expanse. Really, I mean, you look at the paintings that you put in, other than maybe the saguaro paintings, the Canyonland stuff is all about expanse. I mean, you did that one triptych that was done. My understanding is you came to a point and you saw the expanse and you go, I'll capture it in a series, right?
Right. That was a studio piece because, again, the light was just maybe 10 minutes. Was like there.
Right.
But it was just this, it's kind of a celebration of Bears Ears National Monument. That whole area north of that highway is what's referred to as Bears Ears National Monument. It's a kind of compilation of different land ownership plots, but just terrific. I mean, there's no way. I don't like doing triptychs just as a gimmick, you know, but they do serve a purpose. And I had that diptych 2 years ago, Dead Horse Point, because
very well.
There was just no way I could rearrange, you know, that view, that vista, I felt within one rectangle. Like suddenly, I'm definitely interested in how we see and how we experience things, you know. So I read a lot. Like David Hockney has been fascinated with that for his whole lifetime. And the final product may not be something that I would choose to have on my wall, but I love his writings. I love listening to him speak about trying to capture the visual experience rather than trying to capture a rendering of a view. Very different intents, you know?
Well, I think in Hockney's work, you do feel a visceral kind of something, emotional, visceral thing.
Yeah.
Well, and it can be all sorts of emotions, including loneliness and, you know.
And certainly his experimentation with scaling up.
Yes.
You know, his last show at the Royal Academy with just massive canvases.
Right.
And I think that's always fascinated me, is when you scale up, you just can't take in everything in one glimpse.
No.
You travel around it more. So as you scale up as an artist, you have to manage what that journey is going to be like for people in terms of how do you get them around. But there's definitely a sense that, they're not going to be absorbing the whole, you know, in one view. They're going to almost want to step into it and travel around.
And you're a guide, basically.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Especially in a large painting.
And I think for me, it parallels how you experience a landscape. You go to somewhere like Dead Horse Point, and it's a series of glimpses.
Right.
There's just absolutely no way.
No.
So I wanted to capture that in the big Canyonlands piece, Monsoon Rising. The fact that even in paint, I'm not rendering it all to the same level of detail. And some of it feels blurred and out of focus, and some of it feels very tangible and real. You know, in that sense, I was wanting to mimic how we view when we're out there, to kind of recreate the experience of being there, rather than just have a flat rendering, you know, of the real
I think that's
unmoving landscape.
Kind of what I think of when I think of your paintings. You know, at least everybody I represent, not everybody, but great artists have their own artistic voice. And I feel like yours is, I describe it as an ephemeral kind of sensibility to the paintings that you can, and there's a femininity to it, by the way, I think.
There is?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. I can feel it. It's like Mary Russell Farrell Colton. I'm not sure if you know her work, but look at hers.
Okay.
She has that same, she was a tonalist. Painting, you know, from 1912 to maybe in the 30s in Arizona. And, there's something, when I'm looking at your painting here, there's something I just see about it. I don't know. I can't say why, honestly, and maybe that's why paintings are great, but I can feel it.
Okay.
And I do think that is your gift and what sets you so apart from many of your peers is the way that there's an emotional pull in the landscape paintings. I don't know if you feel that's true or not.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I would be very disappointed if people didn't pick up on my emotional attachment to the land, or the emotional excitement of what's unfolding.
Yeah.
You
can feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a movement to it, actually.
Yeah.
Which is unique.
Well, good. I'm glad you picked that up, because it's something I'm trying to embrace, is more movement, more of a sense of, interpretation rather than just a static rendering.
Yeah, and let's talk about how you got to this point as far as the show, because you went through some things that were difficult.
Yes.
We had talked about this a little bit beforehand, just because I didn't want to go down this road unless you wanted to go down this road, because some roads are better not traveled. But, I mean, you have the pandemic, you're dealing with that, and this show we know is coming up, because we probably set this up almost 2 years ago.
During last year's show.
Yeah, exactly, a while ago. So. And then you get a diagnosis that affects your life.
Yeah, so it was actually, I remember my solo show here last year, because it was at that time I had come down on the back of having both a mammogram and an ultrasound that gave me a 0% chance of breast cancer. And I went home from being here, and on the Monday I had an MRI that gave me 100% chance of having breast cancer. So, it's a time frame I will never forget last year. Pretty shocking, yeah. Yeah,
and how do you go through that as an artist, dealing with what you had to go through as far as treatment and all that?
Extremely grateful for being an artist, and I've spoken to this with a lot of friends. As a creative person, thank heavens we have that in our lives. Because I remember the week between biopsy and surgery, and you just can't wait to get the surgery done, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't wait, and time drags. It is so slow.
Yeah.
And I was going nuts, and then I went to the studio and blocked in 2 large paintings, that week, and it ended up being very productive. So it made me incredibly grateful for being creative, for having that urge. I think post-surgery, it kept my head moving forward, as soon as I was out of the bed rest phase, the first thing I did was shuffle to my studio, and I didn't know what I was going to do, but I just thought, I'm going to make some thank you cards for everybody that had helped me through it.
Yeah.
And It was just great, just playing around like a kid again. I had collages going, I had the gouache out. I wasn't at all concerned about whether it would look like a jewel carver. Who cares?
Yeah.
I just wanted to be... You want to be totally absorbed in your head when you're going through something traumatic. It is such a healing process. Your brain just wants to switch off just for a little bit.
Yeah.
And anything that just keeps you absorbed. And you're just like a kid, you're mixing a color, and you're like, oh my gosh, look how that color sits next to that color, and it's just, oh my gosh. It was just such a relief to have it. I don't know that and walking, huge. And I don't know what I would have done without it, because you certainly don't want your nose glued to your phone when you're going through something like that.
Right.
So it kind of was a real clarifying moment in reassuring me that I'm essentially a creative soul.
Right.
Yeah,
you're one of those people.
Yeah.
The gifted.
That's my language. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I do look at them as gifted individuals of some type. I don't know what it is, but there is something about creativity that it makes you think different and
right.
see the world a little differently.
And
maybe cope differently, too.
And cope differently. And it can be so simple, because maybe you don't have the physical or emotional energy to do something complex, at that time. So you can do the simplest of things.
Yeah, which is muscle memory, really, at that point, too,
yes.
if you've been doing it a long time.
Yes, yeah.
And it feels normal.
Yeah.
It makes you feel normal when you aren't feeling normal.
It was interesting in many ways because for months after the surgery, and I don't know what it was, whether it was the anesthetic or whether it was just being exhausted, but I had to think differently. In that normally I kind of think like it feels like these spinning vortexes of multiple thoughts on many layers. Like, and painting for me was almost like a chess game where you're thinking 6 moves ahead, but with all these changing scenarios that if your opponent makes a different move, you've got something lined up to shift. And to me, painting was like that. And I remember saying to my husband, I can't think like I used to think anymore. And I became very linear and very task-orientated in a linear fashion. And that, again, maybe it's a way that your body and mind simplifies things to move you through. But that was very interesting for me because I've never been a linear thinker. And I became one for a few months, and I just thought, well, it's a way of just moving forward because, if your head and thoughts are doing this and you're too tired to think like that, you end up doing nothing.
Right.
So I was very grateful that for maybe 3 months afterwards, it was like, I'm just going to paint this cloud. I'm not going to worry about what I do to this cloud impacts this rock down here. I'm just going to paint this cloud the way I want it.
Yeah. Well, I would say it's grief related. Honestly, I think that's all grief.
Yeah.
That it's like having CTE when you have intense grief and your brain doesn't work the same.
Yeah.
All your hormones have been completely destroyed and messed up, and cortisone's been flying through, and you're in a time of unknowing. How am I going to live? Am I going to live? All these things. What is my body? Who am I? How does this affect my longevity? And that's just grief.
Right. I think, first of all, I didn't really know what the prognosis was going to be for me, and that's probably the worst time.
Yeah, of course.
Is the uncertainty.
Yeah.
And then, once the surgery was, I think when we hear that word cancer, we're all thinking and fearing premature death.
Yes.
And my initial response was, when I didn't know what type, how bad, was, I'm not done yet.
Yeah.
That was my initial response. And then the next response was just overwhelming gratitude for the life I've had. That was the next one. And then once I'd had the surgery and I went back to see my surgeon 3 weeks post-surgery. And, that was probably the most sitting on the edge, not knowing what my future was. And she said, you have a less than 1% chance of this ever returning.
Yeah.
And I had to ask her to say that again.
Yeah.
And then I thought, so this is going to be a life-defining moment, and we all have many of them,
yes.
right? Life is about tweaks and adjustments
yes.
and adjusting to new realities. That's life. We have many of those defining moments. But it's not going to be an experience that defines my life. So a defining moment, but not life-defining, if that makes sense.
And it does make sense, actually. Yeah. It totally makes sense. Because it can. Things like that can define your life. If you can't get past it, it can change it forever. And, it does change it forever, but it doesn't have to be who you are.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes I think that can happen to people when they have those kind of traumas.
I think for me it was shocking in the initial part, and Len Schmiel and I had a correspondence throughout all of this, which has been very nice. And I was saying, I think as artists, by our very nature, we're problem solvers.
Yes,
right?
That's true.
I do all the DIY. I do the plumbing in our house. I fix things. I like to figure out how things are put together.
Yeah.
So I think good artists are problem solvers. We like to dissect things, figure out how they all work together, and put them back together again. And I said to Len, I think the seismic shift with this was, here was a problem, and I just couldn't fix it. It's
beyond your control.
Totally beyond your control.
Yeah, which again makes you go down the rabbit hole.
Right. But what Len and I have been going back and forth over is I had always been someone that was very self-questioning. And I think to a point that can make you a better painter. But at a point, it can be crippling. And I think what has been really positive this year for me is I just feel like I've been set free from that. Because suddenly there's something more fearful than a painting failing. Yeah. Like I used to get an hour into a new painting, and I'd done all the prep work, and I got the field studies, and I was blocking in an hour into it, and I'd already be going, oh my gosh, I don't know if I've got this right. Is it really what I intended? Is it going to work?
Right.
And suddenly and I hope it continues, the sense of freedom that try it.
Yeah.
I now have the knowledge base that if it does start to go off the tracks, surely I have the knowledge base to pull it back on. Or if it goes off the tracks into a different direction, surely I have the knowledge base now to maybe run with that and make it work. So.
Well, I also think it gives you the ability, and I think I see it in these paintings, quite frankly, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about what it took to go through the process and the show is I see a freedom in these, more freedom, I believe. And I think what you're describing, when you can take off the bumpers and just throw the ball as hard as you want, that emotionally it just comes through.
Right.
And
right.
It seems like it did.
It feels like a very personal show.
Yeah, I think so.
And normally in a show, I will have, one or two favorites going in the studio. And I kind of feel like the others never quite get close to them. And in working on this show, in all honesty, every painting, so those paintings, the bigger ones, come together, maybe 4-day sessions, 3 lots of those over several weeks. Every single painting that I put on the canvas then became my favorite. Because I just had this sense of freedom that I was just going to follow it through to what my initial intent or idea was. And I think in this business it's very easy to get a little bit constrained by,
Technique,
being known for a thing. I've always enjoyed painting range. I don't want to just paint one thing. I want to explore multiple things, whatever it is I'm experiencing. And unlike the saguaro one where I just put the halos in, I might have felt like I should have fully rendered them a year ago. And now I'm just like, no, there's something there,
Yeah.
So definitely a sense of more freedom, has come. I hope I hang on to it.
Yeah, I think you will.
Yeah, but it's become a little bit more self-indulgent. Like the less, I'm viewing them more as a personal exploration and journey rather than having a preconceived vision of what I want a show to look like,
Yeah, but isn't that what art is? Having a personal journey that you can share with the viewer, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you let them fill in what you've given them and how you see it, and then they can fill in the rest.
Right. But definitely a sense of Len and I were talking about how, as artists, we're capable of just reaching deep levels of agony while we're working, and just to have the freedom from that for a little while, has been really enjoyable. Yeah. I have loved the last 6 months in the studio.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And it shows in the work.
Yeah.
And again, this is really when you came here, we'd already done a podcast, but I thought there's so much more we could talk about, because I remember getting a couple different emails from you. One about just, we talked about early on when you had gone through the process of your treatment, I didn't know if you'd be up to doing a show or if you wanted to, and you're like, oh no, this is going to help me get through the process.
Yeah. I was in the fortunate position in that I'd had the material because I'd done a bunch of camping trips the fall before. So that wasn't causing me anxiety. I had things that I knew were going to be the basis. I think that's the biggest anxiety, is when you don't have the material, the fresh material, So I had all the source material. The physicality of the surgery was a little bit more long-term than I thought it was going to be. I did physical therapy for 6 months and I just think that's being an artist. What we do is very physical.
Very much so.
And how we paint is not necessarily how your body should be healing from that particular surgery.
I'm sure that's very true.
So my physical therapist was like, can you not give up painting from your shoulder for a while? And I'm like, no, it's taken me 20 years to learn to paint from my shoulder rather than my wrist, So
they don't understand it, I'm sure.
Understand.
That would be a very interesting subject matter to go down, is for treatments for artists and, when they have significant injuries or problems, and how to deal with those.
Right.
I know as a sports medicine doc, we used to deal with ballet people and different things, and so you have to approach it differently.
Yeah.
And for you, I know it would have been, I want to paint, and you're like a thoroughbred who wants to get to the finish line, and but you're, as a physical therapist, they're trying to put the brakes on you so you don't do it, and that's a very hard thing.
And it was, my surgeon was this kind of. I was treated by a team of women, by the way, which was
wonderful.
Extraordinary. The operating room anesthesiologist, the surgeon, my GP, my physical therapist, a whole team of women.
Yeah.
But my surgeon was this little pistol, like 5'3".
Yeah.
No nonsense. Yeah. Oh, you'll be back at it within 6 weeks.
Yeah.
My physical therapist was like, no, a year. I was like torn between these two scenarios. But my physical therapist was actually great. And she was, it was dealing with physical things from the surgery, muscle adhesions and cording and stuff like that, as well as scar work. But she massaged the lymph system and the nerve system too. So she was just fantastic. And she was British, and so we shared the same warped sense of humor and the same kind of era, and just laughed really hard throughout a lot of the physical therapy, and you need to do that too.
Yeah, well, it can be very painful too, as you're going through.
It's exceptionally painful, and I didn't realize that. Actually, the sessions themselves were okay. The day after, oh my gosh, So it was very much stop, start in the studio for like the first 3 or 4 months. But, thank heavens I had it.
And you got through it.
I got through it in like 6 months.
Yeah.
And I have an excellent prognosis. I'm going to be around, hopefully, for a long time.
Yeah.
And,
That's
very grateful.
Yeah, we're all grateful. And it produces, in my opinion, better work.
Yeah.
Honestly, I do. I think this is an amazing show. And
well, you can't have artwork not express life experiences.
No,
and
I
that's
don't think
going to
so.
happen.
Yeah.
It's the outlet, and thank heavens I have that outlet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And is there anything you want to talk about as far as just the paintings themselves, as far as how the nuts and bolts of it?
I had a lot of fun with the larger ones because they're done over multiple sessions. You just have to have a lot more preparation work put in place, and I am a geek, My math teacher at school is still cursing me for not
going into mathematics,
accountant, designing algorithms or something. But I very much enjoy, that part of it. So learning new ways of designing, using armatures, using Loomis's informal subdivision. A lot of these are done with limited palettes. The Sabino Creek piece that we used in the advert, Western Art Collector, was done with 3 colors plus white.
Wow.
the two saguaro pieces are done with 4 colors, so a lot of limited palette work. And that just adds another layer of interest and challenge in the studio. But just some of the more, I really enjoyed doing some of the more tonal pieces in this show, using limited palettes.
Yeah, and it requires a better skill set, I would think.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to, we all want to keep getting better as painters, so it's nice, you learn the theory one year, and it takes a couple of years for it to absorb, and then you kind of, I say to my students, you're adding more tools to your toolbox. And then when you're presented with a situation like, oh, I need these 3 tools from my toolbox.
Yes.
So I think on the commentary, I went into some of the ideas between the armatures and the paintings and the limited palettes, but just,
yes.
Yeah.
For those who are listening to this, we did a video. It was a beautiful video, actually, I thought. And Jill went and described all what's going in with the paintings and where they were painted, and just a deep dive into the individual works. And you can see it on YouTube, you can see it on our channel, you can see it where the show is. And I thought that was beautiful, and it did give me insights to the painting that I wouldn't have ever had.
I sent you that email. I remember when the realization that these are going in frames, and they suddenly become products on a wall.
Right.
Whereas I see them as evidence, the visual statements, visual records of this entire long process, and suddenly that's gone.
Yeah.
And now it's just a product on a wall. And I was like, well, wait a minute. No, the stories have to go with them, surely. So I think there's always that point of anxiety when you realize you've just got to let them go.
Yeah. Well, and I think artists are good at that. They have to be professionals. But I think in your case especially, it had a deeper meaning because of what you went through.
Right.
And these are special paintings in some sense.
But that video that Patrick put together too, it's had such wonderful feedback. People love hearing, even not even the back emotional story, but they love hearing the motivation for a piece.
Yeah.
This piece in particular, that was, I think it needed that explanation behind it of what I was seeing, the curvature and the earth in 2 directions, and it was this peculiar foreground. Normally you get these nice little still life arrangements in the foreground of sagebrush and chamiso and some snakeweed and some tumbleweed. No, this whole field had clearly been tilled at some point or had suffered extreme drought at some point, and all these little sages it was like going to a nursery of sage bushes. They were all the same size, neatly scattered. It was just something that, again, would stop you in your tracks. You're like, well, that's really unusual,
And I'm sure someone who deals in the environment can tell you exactly why.
It would be interesting
and each one of those pieces, I'm sure, is separated because there's only so much water in the desert, right?
Right.
It's like you get in that spot, that's yours, and nothing else. You can't be too close, or you just don't make it.
Yeah. And then at home, I was playing with these ideas because the sage were very square and boxy. And then at one point, the clouds were kind of stacking up and they were turning into rectangles. And I'm just watching this thing. And I do have a sketch of this, where it's just, I'm like, how far can I push this and still have it be part of a show? But I'm going to go home and do the other one too, I think.
Yes, I think you should. Clearly, people like it.
And I referenced Georgia O'Keeffe's because I remember seeing that cloud. Is it Flying Over Clouds? I think it is. In Santa Fe. It was in a museum there. And I'm sure that was probably brewing in the back of my head. But sage bushes in the foreground instead of clouds.
And there's a little 10 by 14 that Dixon did called Sagebrush and Snakeweed, I think. That also has that same sensibility, interestingly enough.
Oh, okay. So nature provides those nice little amusing narratives every now and again that just kind of get you chuckling,
Well, any final words for maybe somebody who's dealing with what you've had to deal with and keep the creative fire burning?
Well, I have a few friends now. I must be that age bracket, you know, I mean, what is it? It's 1 in 7 women now.
Yeah.
I think it is.
Yeah.
At some point is, yeah, just I think for me sometimes, and I think social media's had a detrimental effect. I mean, it's a massive community, but sometimes we have to think that we follow this narrative structure on how to survive something. And
right.
people used to say, well, you're being so brave. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I don't have any choice.
Yeah.
So I think staying present.
Yeah, that's the one.
And just rolling with whatever the day brings, you know. And for me, it was definitely a story of 2 chapters. The first 2 months were dealing with the appointments and the surgery and the physicality of the surgery. And then month 3 and 4 was actually dealing with the emotional side of it. Oh. And that hit me, and it was just as surprising as the first chapter, to be honest. Yeah. And you just have to roll with it and allow your body and your brain to process it. And having the creative thing, I think, too, giving yourself freedom in the work. You know, like I was saying, I was doing collages and making cards. Like, don't feel like, well, you still have to be Joel Carver, the serious painter.
Right.
You know, that's going to come back, but just have some fun and just...
Or maybe it doesn't. I don't know if you need to be the serious painter.
Right.
You know?
But just roll with whatever it is that your brain is asking you to do.
Yeah.
But very fortunate to have the creative process. And like I said, it was a defining moment, but it's not going to define my life.
Yeah.
I don't identify as a survivor or anything like that.
Yeah.
We all have massive things to deal with, and they come along and they adjust the path that we're on, and they tweak our character, and on we go.
And hopefully they don't do other things to your character.
Right.
Which can happen as well.
Yeah.
Well, Jill, thank you so much. I'm excited because
we've
got this show opening, and it's on the web, and the video that she did on the show will be up forever, as well as this podcast. So even if this is 10 years or 20 or 30 years later, hopefully I think it's still current. I think people can take something away from, and I hope that's true on most of these podcasts, that it's something that is long standing, not just, how you doing
It's
kind
a
of
great
thing.
record. It's a great record.
I think it's important.
Yeah.
And it helps people.
And of this whole era, too, you know, as
yeah, right.
what's around us shifts. I mean, it's interesting, extraordinary times, you know.
They are.
It will be,
We're
very
fortunate
fascinating to look back and listen to some of those
again.
I
think so. And I think for us, we're fortunate we have artists and creative people that can, continue to plow through and provide joy.
I just think we might look back on this era as some of the best, strongest artwork produced. Because now I don't spend that much time on social media. I kind of have, with this release of new work. And I'm just looking at what people are doing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just like everyone took this mighty leap forward in the last 6 months. And I just can't help but wonder whether 2 years of the pandemic, people having less cluttered calendars, they're trying to do fewer events, they can't do the events.
Yes.
They're spending, so many artists I know are spending time learning new theory, new techniques, and suddenly, I certainly am seeing it on social media, the quality of the work. And the range of it. It's not just realistic landscape painting. There's some beautiful, poetic, emotional work coming out there. And I just think, wow, everyone's taken a mighty leap forward. Yeah.
Well, we've all, as a world, have gone through a trauma.
Yeah.
And so trauma affects people, creative people, I think, maybe a little differently than some others.
But just having that quality of time to learn, because I think a lot of us just get too busy.
Well,
we can't stand to saying no to an opportunity.
Right.
We get too busy,
right.
and we try and do too much stuff. And I know, for one, I'm going to try and protect that quality time on the calendar.
Yeah.
Longer lengths. Dixon used to go to the desert for 6 months.
Yes.
We go for 4 days and expect miracles to happen. Like there's something about extended time that is directly related to quality.
Yes, I think, that's how great physicists work, right? They just spend time thinking. and you come up with things like Albert Einstein's, theory of relativity, those kind of things. So, yeah, take the time, quit doing so many classes.
Right.
Teaching them.
Well, I love twice a year at Scottsdale is not going overboard anyway. I used to do 5 or 6.
Yeah.
So going back to 2 in a classroom setting when you can really impart a lot of information. That's like, I think that's like the best bang for your buck, as you say here,
Here in the States.
Yes.
All right, you ready to go eat some Mexican food?
I am.
All right,
yes.
I am too.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
It was really wonderful that you do that for the community. I think it's important, and I'm glad that you were willing to do that.
Yeah.
So.
It was time. Yeah.
Yeah. There's time.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you found it today.
And I'm still here.
Yeah.
I'm going to be around for a while, so it's all good.
Yeah. All right. Very good.
You.
Jill Carver. Thank you.